me take you back to the summer of 2022, just after Roe versus Wade was overturned. A new American dystopia was taking shape as anti-abortion regimes in red states across the country were suddenly free to enforce the cruelest, most draconian abortion bans that they could dream up. In those early post-Roe days, our own Ali Velshi traveled to Alabama to talk to healthcare providers, doctors, and community leaders about what was happening on the ground to women in their state. And during that trip, he visited the West Alabama Women's Center. That used to be a full-service women's health clinic. But 7 weeks before Ali's trip, when the Dobbs decision came down, overturning Roe versus Wade and turning back 5 decades of reproductive freedom, Alabama was able to ban abortion with no exceptions for rape or incest. The West Alabama Women's Center, crucially, was still up and running, but it was not the same. Here's a little piece of Ali's conversation on that day with Robin Marty, the executive director of the clinic.
If I walk in here and I see you, you're wearing a shirt that says medication abortion is extremely safe and effective. And I say, can I get some?
No. I can't say anything. If I were a regular person, I would say something like a person can go to aidaccess.org and obtain medication abortion without needing a prescription and have that shipped to them regardless of whether it is a legal state or an illegal state, but that person is running a lot of risk of surveillance and should be very careful. That would be something I could say if I were a regular person. I am not a regular person, so I cannot say that to a patient. I cannot say that to anyone. Honestly, wearing this shirt is a risk, and I do it on purpose because I know that this is one way to make a conversation happen and make people think about this, but I can't provide that information that I just provided to you. Everybody else can.
That was the landscape in the immediate wake of Dobbs. Healthcare providers afraid to even mention the availability of safe, legal abortion in other states for fear of prosecution. And all of this came at a time when that information was absolutely critical for patients in Alabama. More troublingly, during this same period, abortion opponents were claiming that Robin Marty and other providers in the field were exaggerating the risks of prosecution for directing patients to legal health care. But it didn't take long before Alabama's Attorney General told on himself. In 2023, he explicitly threatened to levy felony charges against any individuals or groups who assisted pregnant women in accessing out-of-state abortion care. The threat sent a chill throughout the state's healthcare industry, preventing medical professionals from rendering any sort of aid or guidance, even if it was just verbal, to patients in need. Healthcare providers sued, and they accused the Attorney General of violating their free speech rights and also violating the pregnant patient's right to travel. And this week, a federal judge in Alabama agreed, holding that the state's Attorney General cannot prosecute or threaten to prosecute people or organizations who help Alabama residents seek legal, out-of-state abortion care. According to U.S. District Judge Myron Thompson, the Attorney General violated both the First Amendment and the constitutional right to travel if he tried to bring up these criminal charges against providers. According to the opinion, quote, at its core, this case is simply about whether a state may prevent people within its borders from going to another state and from assisting others in going to another state to engage in lawful conduct there. The court now answers no, a state cannot. Thompson also warned about the broader implications of the Attorney General's threats to enforce Alabama laws outside of that state. He wrote, quote, for example, the Attorney General of Alabama would have within his reach the authority to prosecute Alabamians planning a Las Vegas bachelor party, complete with casinos and gambling, since casino-style gambling is outlawed in Alabama. And that warning brings me to an important point about cases like these. While the ruling is certainly a victory, it also highlights the dangerous Pandora's box the Supreme Court opened when it overturned Roe versus Wade in 2022. Soon after that seismic ruling, the mask of states' rights quickly fell off, and conservatives raced to limit reproductive rights nationwide with new bad faith tactics. These tactics include everything from suing out-of-state providers who prescribe abortion pills to to passing abortion trafficking laws that charge a woman with trafficking her own fetus if she crosses state lines to access an abortion, even in states where it is legal. Possibly the biggest development is the rise of the fetal personhood movement, a dangerous, once fringe movement that aims to create an entirely new legal class of citizens consisting of embryos and fetuses. This move would allow conservatives to charge women under pre-existing homicide laws that in some states carry the death penalty. In other words, the Supreme Court's decision in Dobbs created far more legal complications than it solved for states, leaving judges across the country to navigate this new maze of challenges. And as we've seen on this show, putting millions of women across the country in serious danger. In its Dobbs ruling, the Supreme Court almost guaranteed that these issues would return to the highest court and would force the justices to confront the consequences of their own decision. Joining me now is Robin Marty, whom you saw in the clip with Ali just before the break. She is the executive director of the West Alabama Women's Center, and she is the author of the Handbook for a Post-Roe America. Also joining her is Janice Fountain, executive director of the Yellowhammer Fund, and one of the plaintiffs who sued the attorney general over his threats. Robin, first to you. In that clip that we played before the break, you told Ali that you really feared speaking freely with your patients about the availability of abortion services in other jurisdictions. How has this ruling changed the way that you and the clinic will operate going forward?
You know, it's funny looking at that clip, which always shows when I'm on here. And in the past, when it plays, I found myself always feeling really uncomfortable because I'm like, oops, there I go. That's the thing that I just did that could potentially get us in trouble. And this time I knew it was coming and I watched it and it felt really freeing. It is wonderful to have the chance to be able to tell patients about all of their legal options again, because otherwise we're just as coercive as the government was being in telling them you can only do certain things with your pregnancy.
And Janice, you were also a litigant in this lawsuit, and your organization has been dedicated for years to helping women access abortion and other reproductive health care despite their financial constraints. Obviously, this ruling changes how you're able to operate, but do you worry that this is going to be appealed to the 11th Circuit, the Intermediate Federal Circuit Court that will hear Judge Thompson's ruling on appeal? And we're not quite sure how this will fare when it goes up to that court.
Thank you, Melissa. I just want to affirm some things that we've named and we all know, right? Like, this isn't about life. It isn't about babies. It's not about the conservation of life. And I had this conversation with Dr. Jamila Parrott actually just this past week of how the state has this obsession with controlling the behaviors of folks that they deem unmanageable, right? Be it women, trans folks, but also just seeing how evident that is in this case with the Attorney General, right? When we had this hearing, Judge Thompson asked the AG's office, would you have the same stance if it were a husband that was taking his wife out of the state for abortion care and paying for it? And the Attorney General's response was, no, we don't have an interest in that. And for me, that's evidence that the state only has an interest in the incarceration or even death of low-income folks. And not just that, but that the state is just looking to punish folks like the Yellowhammer Fund, like the West Alabama Women's Center, because we dare affirm that oppressed folks or low-income people should be able to assert their rights, right? Like, when we talk about rights, we have to have a conversation about who can assert them and what that looks like and who can afford to assert their rights. So when we talk about this win, isn't a win, but it's a step, right? And I'm less concerned with what the AG might do next as much as I'm concerned with what we have to do next. As Dr. Parrott names a lot, Roe was a compromise in and of itself. And when we have these conversations about wins, when we stop at wins that only are wins for certain folks, we end up here, right? And so, yes, this is a win. I'm concerned with how we get to implement it, but I'm also concerned with how we go forward. Because we were talking about bans and criminalization. We've seen pregnancy justice name that the criminalization of pregnancy mostly impacts low-income people. 85% of pregnancy criminalization is impacting lower-income folks. And for me, that just reiterates the state has no concern with life. When we talk about preservation of life, Alabama has to sit that conversation out respectfully, right? This country has to sit that conversation out. not only because we have an abortion ban that's complete, but because we have the attempts to regulate midwifery care. We have the attempts to regulate birthing centers, and we've also closed the safest place for Black women to give birth in the state. So when we talk about life and conservation, Alabama it can't talk, right? It has to sit back. It has to figure out a different strategy. This ban is not only deadly, but it's deeply incongruent with what Alabamians want. Yellowhammer Fund just did a 48-county bus tour across rural Alabama and door knocked and talked to everyone across the state. And there's this thought that, oh, everyone hates abortion, no one wants to have abortion access. And that's just simply not true. So not only is it deadly, it's just incongruent with what Alabama constituents want.
So it is clear that there is public appetite or appeal for some kind of access to reproductive freedom, even in red states like Alabama, Robin. But this case is surely a win for you right now. It's going to be appealed to the next level, possibly even to the Supreme Court beyond that. How will you navigate the uncertainty as this case goes through the litigation process, and whether you suffer setbacks at the Intermediate Appellate Court or ultimately the Supreme Court? What will this mean for how you do your work?
Right now, we currently have at least 10 calls a week of people who are seeking out abortion still. They either do not know that it's actually illegal in Alabama because people don't know something like that until it directly affects them, or they're still hoping that we can find a way that we can help them. We have not been able to provide any information, and now we know that if a person calls, we can have them come in. We can find out how far along they are in gestation. We can help them find out if their pregnancy is viable or not, and then we can have a real, honest conversation with them about what do you do next? Do you want prenatal care? Do you want to get an abortion? And if so, how can we help you get that? How can we help you find the nearest clinic that is following your gestational limits? How do you find the help from groups like Yellowhammer Fund or other abortion funds, practical support groups, to be able to get to where you need to go? But most importantly, if there is something that is wrong, or if you are just concerned when you come home, you can come to us for follow-up care. You can come to us and make sure that it was all successful. You can come to us to get contraception. And most importantly, if you get pregnant again later, and this time you do want to have that baby, you can come back to us and know that you can trust us to take care of you.
Robin, this isn't just happening in Alabama. These kinds of tactics are being used all around the country. What advice would you give other providers in other states that are kinds of challenges going forward and how they operate?
I mean, it's really difficult to understand until you're in the position what it's like to try to weigh out the idea that we know that abortion is a human right, even if it's not constitutional at this moment. We know that any person who becomes pregnant has the risk that they might die in childbirth. And so abortion is life-saving. And we know that there are people who will put us in jail for helping them get that. And so it's up to each clinic and each physician to try and weigh those options out. For us, we knew that all of the good that we were doing and providing prenatal care in an area that did not have it, that outweighed our ability to be able to take the extra risks. But for other people, that might not be the same. And so if you have the ability to take that risk with hurting the least amount of people, I urge people to do it.
All right. Thank you, Janice Fountain and Robin Marty.